What's up, world? My name's Chef Jean-Paul Bourgeois in the Louisiana Cooking Test Kitchens, your authority for all things great out the Bayou State. Today we're making a shrimp and okra gumbo with tasso ham, and I cannot be more excited. It's summer here and all these ingredients kind of come into season at the same time. Now this isn't your typical roux-based chicken and sausage or wild game dark heavy gumbos that you might see in the fall and winter. This is what I consider a summer gumbo or a warm weather gumbo because, like I said, if it grows together, it goes together. And okra, tomato, and shrimp, and all these ingredients right here with onions and peppers and garlic, they're all coming in those spring and summer months. So this is a roux-less gumbo. For those who don't like stirring a roux, standing over it for 45 minutes, an hour, you're in luck. But I will say it does take some time. If you've heard me talk about this before, much of Louisiana cooking, much of the Southern cooking in general, when you're talking about one pot based cooking, it's about building flavors and leveling flavors up and in that pot through different cooking methods and so on. So let's go over a few of the ingredients needed for this shrimp and okra gumbo with tasso ham. Of course, we have some beautiful 1621 Gulf shrimp that have been peeled and deveined. We have some tomato here, okra, fresh out the garden. You've seen it on every menu here. Also some tasso ham, the Trinity, of course, which is almost in all Cajun recipes or Creole recipes, which is onion, celery. We have two different types of bell pepper, red and green, some jalapeno for some extra punch, a good wad of garlic, some green onions, and of course some shrimp stock. Now, for those who are not familiar with shrimp stock, well, you're in luck because you can check out the other episode where we've actually made it on this YouTube channel. It's going to be linked below here. So let's get started here. I have a pot heating up here. I have my big old Magnolite. You can see I'm cooking a feast here. So we got a good bit, about a cup of oil here. Essentially, the way you want to think about this, we're not going to have a flour and oil roux. We're actually going to use the okra and oil to make, I guess, a flourless roux because okra is a thickening kind of vegetable. And that's why I prefer not to mix okra with flour roux. I want to get the flavor from the okra, of course, but I want to use its qualities to thicken stews and sauces and gumbos instead of the flour. And it just keeps everything nice and clean and crisp, and you can taste all the seafood in the stock and in the shrimp and all the smokiness of the ham and the vegetables without the kind of the clutter of what can be a flour roux when you toast that flour really dark. So I got my flame on hot, and really the goal here is to cook this okra until it's fully broken apart and roasted in this pan. For those who don't like okra and gumbos, it's probably because you feel like it makes a gumbo slimy or a sauce slimy. I get that. I don't like slimy things that much either. Cooking the okra in this way will really help and almost eliminate all of that sliminess that you get out of it, but still thicken it in a way that feels like a gumbo, tastes like a gumbo. Our oil's pretty hot here. Let's get this okra in. Now I'm going to add the okra and the tasso ham together. All that okra goes in. You can see even that cut okra is kind of sticking to that bowl. That's that sticky, slimy texture of it really doing its thing there. I'm also going to throw my tasso in because all this is going to roast together. Obviously, I want the okra browned and broken apart, but I also want that tasso broken apart. Now, for those not familiar with tasso ham is a smoked meat product that you see throughout southern Louisiana, everywhere from West Louisiana all the way to New Orleans. You see a lot of New Orleans restaurants using tasso ham folding into their recipes. You can find it at many meat markets throughout. You can get it online from a lot of meat markets throughout Louisiana. But essentially, it's a seasoned, cured, and smoked even pork shoulder or sometimes pork chop but I like the pork shoulder versions because it has more fat in it, and that fat is much more able to render and kind of fold into those sauces, gravies, and gumbos. So it's in the pot, we're on high. We're gonna roast this okra and tasso ham till it's brown and falling apart before we move on to our next step. Can't say this enough. It's really so much about building those flavors and levels of flavor in that pot, one step at a time. So don't rush it, be patient, and you're gonna be glad you did when you put it in that gumbo bowl for dinner. All right, we have allowed this okra and tasso concoction to really cook down in that fat. See, I have that lid on this Magnolite pot. We're at about a medium-low heat, and it's really just kind of doing its thing over the last 30 minutes or so. And as you can see, that okra in here is just really broken down. You're seeing a lot less slime come off that okra, and you're creating this beautiful fond on the bottom of the pan also. And that's just a combination of the fat and the seasoning from the tasso and some of those natural juices from the okra. I'm just using my wooden spoon to scrape that off. It will burn if you don't scrape it, but brown like that is just added flavor. So really work that in there. This is looking right, pretty perfect for our next step, and that's introducing this concoction and building on this concoction of tasso and okra with some onions. And I never heard of a Cajun recipe with too much onions. And so this is about, I don't know, I would say three large onions here. You can just dump those right in. I'm gonna turn the heat to high now, just because I know I'm about to add a bunch of ingredients that are not hot, so it's gonna lower that cooking temperature. We're gonna get that coming back up as best as possible. And your garlic. So we got all of our onions and our garlic in that pot. And much like we did with the okra, we want to just get that onion stirred in and cook it and keep it cooking. Get it nice and soft until it starts to brown and fry in that fat on the bottom of the pan. That's going to take another 15-20 minutes or so. Again, just developing those flavors for this gumbo. So key to finishing it as a really cohesive meal at the end. All right, our onions and garlic have been cooking for about 10 or 15 minutes. They're starting to get nice and translucent, brown around the edges. That's exactly what we're looking for out of this sofrito of sorts of what we're gonna make it. You can tell I am vegetable heavy. I just love a lot of vegetables, Trinity, in my gumbos. Feel free to cut that back if you like. It's hard to say to add more because look how much is actually in this pot, and that's a big pot, and I got all this to add still. So lastly, we have the rest of the Trinity, but also some tomato. Tomatoes and okra historically in Creole cooking go hand in hand and perfectly together. So putting them in this gumbo seems perfectly fine to me. There are some people that say tomatoes don't go in gumbo, but I feel like that's much more of Cajun style gumbos. When it comes to the Creole style, New Orleans style gumbos, nothing wrong with some fresh summer tomatoes going right in the pot, especially when you're using really nice okra. So I'm gonna just add those tomatoes. You can see they've just been cored, the skins are on, and they're gonna cook exactly like that as a cored whole tomato or quartered tomato. Some red bell peppers, just add a nice little burst of color. And then green bell peppers are what's really classically used in the Trinity. Some jalapeno, and that's probably 2 jalapenos not seeded, add a little spice, and then celery. And just like the onions, we're gonna make sure we get those stirred in really nice. And all that moisture from the tomato, from the celery, from the bell pepper are gonna deglaze the bottom of that pot that you see all that good sticky stuff on the bottom. That's gonna lift that right up because of that moisture hitting that hot surface. That's called deglazing. We just wanna use our paddle to kind of aid in that deglazing, if you will. Stir that in. This technique a lot of times in Louisiana cooking is called smothering. And it may use a little bit of liquid, but this has enough liquid in it. And really what that means is just a slow smothering, a slow cook with the lid on and allowing all those ingredients in the pot to break down and kind of become unified together. All right, I can smell all these wonderful flavors really coming off of this pot. And you can see when I get in there, all of those vegetables, the okra, the tomatoes, all the peppers and celery, they're starting to break down, if not broken down fully. That bottom of the pot looks pretty good. I've been scraping it, getting all that gras doux or fond off the bottom. This time, we built all the layers of vegetable and flavor within here, in this pot, but now it's time to add the stock. Once that stock goes in, you gotta let it cook some more. Yes, so this is our shrimp stock, homemade shrimp stock made from the shrimp heads of the shrimp we're using and the tails. Some white wine, tomato paste, a bunch of herbs and lemon in that shrimp stock. So, I mean, we're talking about wonderful foundations for beautiful gumbo making. I want to turn that fire on high because this needs to come up to a boil before we lower it to a simmer and it cooks for that extended period of time. Let's stir that in. And that okra that we've smothered down in this pot will just gently thicken this gumbo, which is what we want. So this is going to be a nice, clean, crisp, powerful gumbo made from all that cooking, all that smothering down in that pot. And before we put the lid on and let it simmer, we do want to give it some seasoning, keeping in mind that there is also seasoning in that tasso ham already. So we don't want to overdo it, but we will give it some salt and pepper right now. Just give it a few bay leaves first. Nice liberal pinch of salt, some cracked black pepper. Again, we're going to come back and re-season this throughout this process, so you don't need to nail it and get it all right now. And just a couple dashes of hot sauce to bring up the acidity. If you're wondering why cook it in this pot, why not a black iron pot? So tomatoes do have a fair amount of acid in it. And so when I'm making this gumbo, I do like to use an enamel-coated pot or a cast aluminum pot like this old Magnolite. And it just gives me peace of mind that that acid won't react with the raw iron, giving that metallic flavor off. So that's just my concern. You're probably pretty safe to do it, I would think. But if you have an enamel coated or you have a aluminum, then why not? Why even risk it and get these types of gumbos in those pots instead of your cast iron? Let's just give it a taste to see where it's at. Those jalapenos giving a good bit of heat off of there. I'm gonna give it another little pinch of salt, just so it helps me taste just a little better. Salt, so important to the cooking process. Just allows us to taste all those flavors, all those herbs, all that shrimp stock in there. Without salt, we wouldn't really get an idea of what's happening. And that's at a good place right now to where I'm not gonna season it. I just wanna get that up to a hard simmer, then let it go for about an hour, hour and a half at a low simmer. All right, we've been cooking now for about 2 hours. I've tasted this a number of times over the course of those 2 hours. I'm gonna give it one more because all I really have to do now is put the shrimp in and get those cooked fully and then garnish with some green onions. It still needs a little bit of salt, I think. And go ahead and, this is the season to taste section of your recipe, if you're following along. And another little pinch of salt. And just to increase the acid just a touch, I'm gonna go ahead and give a couple bumps of hot sauce. Then we're good to go with our shrimp. You can see these have been peeled and deveined, sitting in our fridge, just draining nice and dry. We can go ahead and just add those in like this. Whew, that is, whenever you're putting this much shrimp into any dish, you know, I mean, it's gotta be good. It's gotta be good. Now, these shrimp have their own flavor as well, right? So giving them time, 20 minutes to simmer in this gumbo is gonna actually help your gumbo bring on a little bit even more, bring a little more flavor to your gumbo. You see, they don't take long to even start cooking in there. Really low simmer here. You don't want to boil the shrimp. You don't want to aggressively cook them. You want them to just slowly poach, kind of steam, slow cook in that gumbo. Let's give it about 10, 15 minutes here. Let it do its thing. When it's time, we'll finish it up and it's time to eat. I'm gonna get my ladle out. I'm turning this fire off. You can see how those shrimp have curled real nice. They've just been poaching very gently, simmering in this gumbo. Before I go ahead and serve, what I wanna do here, I'm just gonna slice some green onions real quick. I'm gonna save some of those as, you know, a garnish for every bowl for folks who may want some. We're gonna throw some of the whites in there. Adding some very thin sliced rounds of okra is a nice little way just for you to remember what that okra looked like before it got cooked in this gumbo for 2 hours. Because it is, you know, it's a pleasant vegetable to eat raw. So garnishing this gumbo is pretty nice to be able to see. It's nice thin rounds like that. Take our bowl. Get a nice heaping mixture. Ooh, look at all those shrimp, guys. Got that tasso floating around in there. Just a couple more shrimp right on top. Why not? And then from there, throw a little rice. I only like a little bit of rice in my gumbo. Little rice like that. Just green onions kind of sprinkled around. And then like that fresh okra. Just right on top. Shoot, I'm just gonna go ahead and throw the rest of these green onions in there. Just like that. Give that a stir. I mean, that's looking pretty photo worthy right there, right? All right, let's give it a shot, huh? A little rice, a little okra, a little shrimp and tasso. I mean, that is a chunky, hearty bite. This might be a summer gumbo, but it's still gonna fill you up. Really love that balance in that dish. It's such a nice relief, even on a hot day, to have a delicious gumbo. My name is Chef Jean-Paul Bourgeois. I am out.